welcome to Saved by Old Times, a musical discussion podcast. This is an unauthorized and very unofficial look into the discography of the band Deerhunter. And today, on our very first episode, we will be chatting about the band's murky and mysterious debut album. My name is Trent, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. David Vance. Dave, how you doing, sir?
Chatting, I would probably say it's more like wading into a swamp that I've never kind of like. I don't really know how to describe this. I guess you're just like holding my hand as I slowly wade into the depths of alt rock.
That is correct, yes. I would say briefly that Dave and I are very long-time best friends, and for the entertainment of our listeners, we will be putting that friendship to the test during this process for a couple reasons. One, Dave has already outlined, I've signed you up for an odyssey of epic proportions here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely. I don't know exactly like what genre we're going into. It seems to be like independent rock, alt rock, but I'm excited. Definitely excited. Yes. Coming into this from a background of jazz music there's definitely things that cross over and definitely things that do not.
And I am excited to hear about those and explore those. So yes, having not heard this band at all and not being particularly familiar with the genre, you decided to sign up and do a long-form podcast with me. And I'm so sorry. So we'll see how that goes. And reason two that we are putting our friendship to the test is that I am not and have never been a morning person. And I would like to state for the record that Dave has dragged me out of bed this morning to start this podcast. I just wanted to say off the top, Dave, when in our 23 years of friendship have you known me to be a morning person?
Well, I didn't think 10 o'clock was a morning person, to be honest.
You got to get up before that. You got to do all your prep. It's not like you just roll out of bed and run the show here.
Yeah. Are you sure?
Yeah. Anyways, here we are, trapped together in this format where we will be breaking down every single Deerhunter album, or we will simply break down ourselves, whichever one comes first, but we hope to be saved by old times.
Hell yeah.
So let us go forward with some introductions. Dave, do you want to do an intro first?
I think I've done basically as much as I need to. I am coming into this from the perspective of jazz music. I have a little bit of experience in jazz performance as well as a music degree, a bachelor's of music performance in jazz. But as far as hands-on experience, that is up to my good friend here.
Ooh, thank you for that smooth transition. Yeah, my name's Trent. I would self-describe myself as a Deerhunter superfan. I am a home recording enthusiast, and most importantly, the veteran guitarist of many failed indie rock bands. So I assure you, you're in good hands here. If there's anyone who can kind of poke their way through a wall of chaotic noise, I feel like it's me. So we'll take a run at this.
How long have you been listening to Deerhunter for?
So here's the thing. I have been listening to them since around 2010 when the album Halcyon Digest came out. However, I didn't really get super deep into them until about last year, which would be 2020 for the record, when a lot of us had a lot more time on our hands. And I thought, hey, here's a band that I, enjoy a handful of songs, but I haven't really listened to a lot of their albums front to back kind of thing. And I started going through, and as I was going through, I just had more and more questions. To me, they're a fascinating band because they go through so much change and so much evolution, and things are messy, and the history gets complicated. And then I had to know more, and I had to figure out what was informing each album and stuff. And so I had too many thoughts that needed to be shared. So I'm glad you're here with me to do that.
Yeah, I guess we can get into it if you wanted to go straight into it. What is Deerhunter?
Yes, so Deerhunter is a Atlanta, Georgia-based band. They would primarily be known as indie rock or alternative rock, despite the fact that the frontman states that he hates that term.
What's to hate about indie rock? To be honest.
Well, I think as we'll get into on this album. I think what Bradford doesn't like about the term indie rock is that he doesn't like the commercialization of indie rock. I think he likes people making projects that they believe in from an artistic standpoint and not necessarily making to be commercially viable. And I think he thinks indie rock is like a tag that was slapped on the whole genre, when like indie rock can be anything from like new wave inspired like keyboard synth pop jams, and then also like really noisy walls of guitars and stuff. And he's like, why are these the same genre? Why wouldn't you call that its own thing and this its own thing? I think that's what he's going with. Yeah.
Yeah, this is certainly independent rock music.
Oh, this is independent. We can confirm that.
I don't know exactly how the term indie gets thrown around in the business, but I assume that basically everything that's not on a major label is technically indie, right?
Correct, yes. And then that's kind of the challenge with the genre, is it grew out of the 1980s college rock scene. Mm-hmm. And so basically, originally, bands were unsigned, and so they were called independent rock bands. But then, as shared influences and stuff get passed around, there was, kind of its own genre taking place of these unsigned indie rock bands in the 80s.
Yeah.
So then it just became a genre label, and originally it was called alternative, and then it just became indie.
Yeah, I guess if you are getting compared to every single like garage rock band and like three guys in a shed that shows up in the Midwest United States, and you're getting compared to all of these guys, I guess you might hate it as well. I don't know.
Yeah. So back to our friends in Deerhunter. So our story really starts with Bradford Cox and Moses Archuleta. They're trying to create a noisy art rock project where they combine the like kind of trance-like influences of ambient and electronic music with more like garage rock aesthetics and songwriting. They go through various early members, but eventually they enlist two friends from the local Atlanta punk scene, Colin Mee on guitar and Josh Farver on bass, to begin work on their debut album.
And the album, we're just going to call it Turn It Up.
Correct, yeah.
We're gonna call the first album titled Turn It Up. It uses an expletive that we're just not going to use.
Right. If people want to know the full title, they can look it up. If you're listening to this, the internet still exists. So you can read the full title. And yeah, we understand why it's there. And it makes sense within the context of the album and what it's about. But yeah, that's just not something we're comfortable repeating. So yeah, Turn It Up is what we will call it for today.
So we're getting into the first album. You gave me a link to this, and I've taken a look at it several times. It is fairly interesting, but go ahead.
So they're signed to if we're using the term independent, very independent label called Stick Figure Records, which is really run by a local figure in the Atlanta rock radio scene. He was a radio DJ for Georgia Tech at the time and was really interested in a lot of musical genres that were not getting coverage on the radio, that he couldn't play or were difficult to find in record stores. So He started this label called Stick Figure Records. So for this album, one thing I wanted to share to try kind of give the listeners who maybe haven't heard it a bit of context of what it sounds like. I tried very hard to find an official review, but because this album, there was only ever 300 copies released.
Nice.
Yeah, there's not a lot of press on it. And the fact that the band chooses to not acknowledge its existence most of the time also means there's not a lot of press out there on it. But I did find one that I would like to share some choice quotes from that I think really helps paint a picture of what this album sounds like.
Okay.
So from AllMusic, Stuart Mason rated this album a 3.5 out of 5.
Hey, that's not bad.
That's not bad.
That's not bad at all.
I feel like it's a rating where it's like, okay, Deerhunter ends up being a fairly notable band, and I don't want to trash any of their albums super hard, but 3.5 out of 5 kind of feels like I didn't really like it, but I didn't want to rate it too poorly. That's what that means to me.
That's like the 80% on Metacritic. That's just like it's okay, but but you got to have a 10 out of 10, so it's bad.
Right. So he describes the sound of this album as an aggressive blend of guitar skronk and rhythmic pummeling, which I think is a great choice of words.
Skronk is
skronk.
That's squirrel ronk. or what do we got here? We got scroll, cronk.
I think it's like an onomatopoeia of like if you just like
okay.
make a terrible shape on guitar and just let your hands slip onto the strings, it'd be like skronk.
Yeah.
I think is what it sounds like.
Skronk. Oh, okay, yeah, the comic book. It's just like okay,
exactly.
Yeah, cool. That's the comic book adaptation of Deerhunter when they just like jump through the brick wall and it's just strumming on the guitar and it goes skronk.
Exactly like that. Yes.
Okay.
And then in my personal favorite section, I think he gives a good like summary of the album entirely. He says, the 5-piece band, which at this time it's a 4-piece, but anyways, the 4-piece band favors a squalling, echo-heavy sound that makes individual instruments and vocals nearly impossible to make out. The loudest sound to pierce through the murk is as likely to be a simple one-note piano part or a thwacking hi-hat cymbal as anything else. The resulting mess of sound is a take-it-or-leave-it affair that some listeners will find an impenetrable wash of noise.
Cool.
That's pretty harsh. It's not entirely wrong, but it's pretty harsh.
I mean, like I haven't actually heard any like negatives so far in the review. He's just been using descriptors.
Yes.
So at this point, I don't really think that this guy is trashing it, so to speak.
And to be fair, I did cut it off for brevity, but he does go on to say, like, if that's your thing, you're going to love this. So he's putting some caveats on it, but he's not saying don't listen to it.
That's pretty good. Like, I think there's people who can like this, for sure. We'll get into it, but it might not be me.
Yeah, I feel like we'll discuss it, but I do think there is a place for music like this, and I get the context in which it would be effective. Mm-hmm. So at this point, Deerhunter is 4 people, primarily Bradford Cox on guitar and vocals. He is a very outspoken frontman. He is an incredibly talkative person, but an incredibly intelligent person, I would say. He holds your attention very easily because he very often has interesting things to say. In terms of his role within the band from a music standpoint, he draws a lot of focus, I think is the best way to say it. He very often appears in costumes, and he very often, during instrumental sections, will go off on kind of stage antics to keep people engaged. A quote that I think really summarizes his approach to this is he said, "I don't like the idea of going around on stage in just jeans and a t-shirt. It feels anticlimactic." And I think that's a great way of looking at live music.
Yeah, and seeing like a little bit of what you've shown me already, there is definitely an arc to the live performances, and I think we'll get into that.
Absolutely. Additionally, I would say, and we'll talk about this a lot, but I think Bradford Cox is essentially a noise artist put in the context of a traditional rock band.
Yeah. Would you say if there was a songwriter, would he be the songwriter? Would he be writing the songs?
Primarily, yes. For most of their runtime, he is kind of the de facto leader, as much as he pretends like he's not. Mm-hmm. And he is the primary songwriter. Later on, there will be some shared songwriting duties, but especially this album is mostly his songwriting. And I think his approach to songwriting is very interesting. He says that, like, in his early formative musical years, he would experiment with cassette tape players.
Yeah.
And he would just record layer upon layer of like guitars, voice, drums in just kind of a stream of consciousness. And he often references intentionally not planning out his lyrics as he goes to do a vocal take and as he's songwriting. And he just loves adding more and more elements until he says it starts to feel crowded.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
Yeah. That is definitely happening on this album. But I think that's an interesting approach. I think he likes to have lots going on and have it kind of feel all-encompassing and engrossing, which is interesting. On to my man and co-founding member of the band, Moses Archuleta. He's credited as playing drums and also providing electronics. And he was actually originally the band's keyboardist until their drummer quit. And then he had to move over to the drums to help support the band. But I think his role of electronics, while it, like most of the time it's not officially stated, being like, oh, he played this synthesizer or he added tape loops to this particular song.
Yeah.
I think that role really is like creative director of the band, if that makes sense.
Okay.
He's credited a lot as being the one who took kind of Bradford's like noisy garage rock kind of songs and brought in that ambient and electronic influence to try and make them a bit more atmospheric and a bit more hypnotic.
Yeah. And so, like, when you say electronics, you usually just mean, like, sort of anything that is outside of the realms of drums, outside of guitar, bass. If there's, like, some added effects onto songs, or if there's, like, some, like, added loops or some added things, like, it's not necessarily Moses that's doing it, but it's sort of being planned, because, like, the album or, like, the songs, at least, that you're listening to are sort of like planned in post, as far as like what I've heard. I don't exactly know like what is going on yet. I'll when we come to that, I'll ask those questions. But like it does seem like there's things that are done during recording and then the things that are done after recording. So if you're going to say like there's a director or there's an editor,
yes,
Moses would be the editor.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And I think he has a really good quote that I want to share, because I feel like it applies to a lot of people making art, making music, and some maybe people who are making a podcast for the very first time.
Hey.
He says, "I try to worry about making something that's more of a document than a product. I think people get too caught up in trying to make the perfect song or album, and they just spend forever waiting for the perfect opportunity to come along. What I'm trying to say is that it's a lot more valuable to be willing to take risks on your own and put yourself out there early on. Don't be so overly precious about your art that it ends up being to your detriment." And I feel like that's exactly what they're doing on this album.
Maybe just like cut out that last part and put it on a sort of just like a poster with a little cat hanging from a tree, and just like, yeah, just get something to motivate you.
Hang in there and don't be overly precious about your art.
Hell yeah.
Over to my man, Josh Farver, on bass. He was brought in for this album as a replacement when their original bassist, Justin Bosworth, died in a skateboarding accident before the album could be recorded.
That's messed up.
It's messed up, and so this album is actually dedicated to him in the liner notes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
The 300 copies of it.
Right, yeah. They that's their friend, right? So I understand.
Yeah, no, it's sweet. It's just like crazy, since there's just like 300 copies of this with that liner note in it.
Yes, and I would say already we're off to an interesting start with this band. I feel like in the same way that Spinal Tap goes through drummers through weird circumstances, yeah. I feel like this band goes through members in weird circumstances. And, there's not a band that I think that experiences more just bizarre tragedies along the way than Deerhunter. So I think this is, they start off completely on brand. I would say Josh is a very distinctive bassist. He's not necessarily like a lead bassist like someone like Peter Hook from Joy Division or New Order, where he's like up the neck playing melodies essentially. Right. But he often like creates the main riff of earlier songs in their catalog.
Yeah, I get
he's
that.
Providing the part that's kind of catchy, and that's the kind of focal point of the song. Mm-hmm. As well as I think his bass sound is very interesting. It's very like crunchy and kind of mid-focused, which normally bass is relied on to be like the low end and kind of provide like a supportive structure for the rest of the instruments.
Yeah.
He's kind of like really poking out of the mix a lot of times. And I mean, it's to their benefit, because I think he's adding great parts. But it's an interesting approach, I think.
Yeah, I definitely get that as well. Like, I'd say like, as far as this like album goes, like the sound profile, which we'll get into, like the bass and drums seem to lead a lot of the.
Yes. And then lastly, we have Colin Mee, who plays guitar on this album. I would like to do as much credit as possible to Colin, but it is very difficult to find any information on him. He is with the band for this album and the next one, and after that leaves. And because it's so early on in the band's time, there isn't a lot of press that really talks about Colin specifically, or there's not a lot of interviews with Colin specifically. Mm-hmm. So I can't really speak too much to what kind of he provides or what his kind of like creative process is like. I can say that part of the reason that he ends up leaving later on is that he kind of feels like the showman that is Bradford Cox kind of starts to overshadow the band's music a little bit. And because Bradford is such like an outspoken and interesting person to interview, he feels like they've just kind of become a quote machine. Yeah. And people are focusing on, oh, Bradford said this, Bradford said that. And they're not really like coming for the music anymore. They're coming to be like, oh, what's this controversial Deerhunter band that I keep seeing, on Pitchfork or on blogs?
Okay.
So I think he's a very principled person, but he doesn't last particularly long.
Yeah, and like it does seem, at least in the band makeup, that he's a rhythm guitarist or like he's a backup guitarist.
That's right. Yeah, I would say rhythm guitarist for sure.
Whereas like there's a lot of guitar parts that seem to be like either a lead guitar part, and I'd think for the most part, if there's some sort of melody or if there's some sort of main riff, that's being played by Bradford, right?
That would be right, yes. Bradford is like a very interesting guitarist in that he floats around between main vocal duties and very often playing prominent lead guitar parts. Mm-hmm. Very Stephen Malcolmus in that way, where he's like, hey, I'm the front man, and also I'm going to play the solos.
Yeah.
Which I think is always a very interesting band dynamic. But anyways. Cool. Should I mention where the name comes from?
Yeah, I asked at the beginning, so Deerhunter, that's fairly interesting.
Right. So again, on brand for this band of having weird stories. The name Deerhunter comes from their original drummer, whose name is Dan Walton. He never appears on a release. He's very, very early on. And he said it was chosen not to be an allusion to the film The Deerhunter with Robert De Niro, but just something that sounded cool. And Bradford has said originally when they were starting the project, he didn't really care what the name was going to be. Mm-hmm. So he just went with it. And it just kind of stuck as a tag, even though Dan left.
Yeah.
They just continued to be known as Deerhunter, and they just ended up being stuck with it. And the funny part is Bradford said he hates the name now because it has no meaning to them whatsoever. It's just the name they have.
That seems to be a common thing. It's like we hate the name of our band. We hate our first album. This band seems to dislike a lot of its early ideas.
Yes.
It's an interesting theme that keeps coming up.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think you said when we were talking the other day that they're very self-conscious.
Super self-conscious.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. And, maybe they wouldn't like the fact that someone is doing an incredible deep dive into this early album. But anyways, I think it's interesting.
Who knows? Maybe, they can get in angry comments. We'll read them.
I would be honored to be completely roasted by Bradford Cox.
Excellent.
I would feel very happy about that. I'm sure he could just eviscerate me. So do you want to talk about what this first album's about? Okay, so this album, the title, as legend has it, comes from a real quote that was yelled by a heckler at one of their early shows. Mm-hmm. And I think that really sets the tone for what this album is going for. Bradford has called it a display of adolescent rage, and it really kind of centers on themes of frustration and discomfort with one's surroundings.
Yeah, adolescent rage is one type of rage that you definitely hear. You hear several different types of rage as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rage going on in the title, in the album art, in everything.
Yes. I want to drop in just two quotes from Bradford on looking back on this album, and then I want to talk about the album art because we've alluded to it a couple times. Mm-hmm. And I want to get your first impressions as someone who I just, sent, hey, check out this album. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is what we're doing. So there was a quote, there was an article by Noisy, which is under the Vice brand. Mm-hmm. And they did a long-form interview with Bradford where they asked him to rank all of Deerhunter's albums, which is very interesting, and I'll probably acknowledge it a few times while we go through this.
Yeah.
But when talking about this album, he said, I don't generally acknowledge it. We didn't know what we were doing. It wasn't the fault of the engineer or any of the musicians. We didn't have the time that we've had since to experiment in the studio. And he says, when I listened to that album, if I just had an extra week to think about things, it might be in a different position on this list. Or I might acknowledge it as something I've done. At this point, I consider it to be a student film. You don't rank a great filmmaker's thesis film at school as among their filmography, which I think is fair. I think, this is more of a proof of concept than it is their actual first album.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But like sometimes you do. Sometimes you do at least dive into the art that they make when they're coming up.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. I think it's more interesting to talk about things that have imperfections than just, only ever look at things that are 10 out of 10 masterpieces and just be like, isn't it so great? Isn't it so brilliant? I don't think that makes for a very interesting discussion. I think going into an album like this that has those rough spots and has stuff that we can pick apart makes for a way more interesting discussion.
Certainly gives me a lot to talk about as my first introduction into the band.
Yes. Okay. So then, speaking of your thoughts on things, what were your very first thoughts when I sent you this?
Yeah, so I get a link. I get a YouTube link because it's not on Spotify, and I click on this link. I can see in the link description, I see the full name of the album. So immediately I'm just like, okay, cool. And then,
this is aggressive.
Very aggressive. And like I can even just talk about the album title right now because I didn't know that story, that anecdote going into it. So when I click on or when I see that title, I would think that it is referring to me, the listener, right?
Right, yeah.
So like very aggressive, probably like from my perspective, probably not the best title.
Right.
because the way that you're telling me now, it seems like an inside joke, right?
I think it's like they're taking back the term, right?
Absolutely. It's a story that only they know and like their diehard fans know and like people that have been covering it if they've heard Bradford talk about it, but if they haven't heard anybody talk about it, it just seems like a face value title saying turn it up, expletive.
Yes.
And it's like I guess okay. sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is in my opinion, like now that I'm hearing that anecdote, it gets a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But before that, I would have said that the title didn't really do its job very well, just because like I would think that this title would offend more people than it's trying to. I think this album is trying to like turn off a certain type of listener.
Yes.
But I would say that the title goes a little bit too far in that regard, because it's like an inside joke, like and if you're just like walking up to someone or in a conversation, it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna murder your dog, Stephanie. No, that's not actually. That's just an inside joke. That's something me and my friends say. It's not. I'm not actually going to murder your dog. Oh, your name is Stephanie? Right. Oh, oops. Right. I'm sorry. It's just an inside joke.
Right. Well, I look forward to your debut album called "I'm Gonna Murder Your Dog, Stephanie." That sounds great.
Yeah. And then I click on the link and I get the album art, and I would say, like, if you're trying to offend the right amount of people or like the right type of listener, this album art is rad. This album art is so good.
It's pretty cool, actually. Like it's aggressive, but it looks cool.
It is like, so like the thing about it is like, I'll do a brief description of it because like it's entirely in negative. So like it's black and white and negative. It's got a negative filter on it, so the blacks are whites and the whites are blacks, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the way it's composed makes you want to start at the top. So you look at the top. You look at there's two figures that have been like symmetrically
like mirrored.
Yeah. They're mirrored. There's two people in scare quotes because they have deer heads for heads.
Yes.
Which is pretty startling. You take a look at that, and then they're sort of like, you see them like sticking something to each other's neck, which at first looks like a knife, but then you see a flag that comes out of it over the shoulder, which looks like, I think, the Texas flag. It's got the two bars on each side, and then it's got the Lone Star.
Yeah,
that's what made me think of it, right?
Yeah.
So like it's got the one star in the middle.
Yeah.
Also, I guess we'll talk about it now. These two figures are completely naked.
Oh yes.
Because like as your eyesight sort of drops, you get the view, which is like really camouflaged because of the black and white on negatives. So you don't even see it. It feels like an optical illusion. And then it's just like, oh, that's a dick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's just I have in my notes, just a big old appendage right there.
So like this album art does offensive correctly.
Yeah,
this album
I think
art
so.
does it so well because like this is something that like your Christian parents will just like burn and throw in the trash. Like this is like really like something that you can piss off your parents with.
Yes. I think, yeah, that element of like making something to intentionally piss off a certain audience so that another audience will then love it.
Right.
I think that's exactly the approach that's going on here.
Yeah. So like when you're talking about tone, very violent, very aggressive, very just like in your face, angry punk sort of vibe. This definitely does it better for me than I would say the album title does it.
Yeah.
As a first impression, I get that from the album art much better than the title.
Right.
And then we can get into the first song.
Yes.
Because like I think the first song also kind of just like plays upon these first impressions. So why don't we go ahead and just like get into that?
Let's do it.
Trent and Dave, listen to the song.
Okay, so we have just listened to the opening track, N Animals. Dave, what are your first thoughts?
So if you want to like bring your attention back to the album art, I think I think this is something that you could very easily compare. Just thinking about like first impressions, because like this is also the first thing I heard. Which was like scrambling sounds, a little bit of making out sessions with the microphone. That's very nice. You start with a little bit of just like open tongue kissing on the microphone.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what that sounds like.
and then you get a chord.
Yes.
Or at least you could call it a chord.
It is a chord.
It is a chord, and here's what I can make out about it.
Okay.
And I wrote this down. The notes, I think, just from listening, are G, A sharp, B, D sharp, and E. And there's a bunch of like accidentals that I've thrown in there that don't really make sense. You're like, why are you using A sharp and D sharp? Well, because like they're... Okay, there's a few ways that you could interpret this chord.
Okay.
If you wanted to. You could interpret it as a D flat major 7, add the sharp 5th, and also add the flat 2nd.
Okay.
Second inversion, of course.
Of course.
You could also view it as an E minor major 7, augmented 5th, second inversion. Of course.
Of course.
All of these are close harmony as well. Like they're all like really close to each other.
Yep.
Another way that you could look at this is probably an E diminished major 7, adding the 5th. So like E diminished normally has a diminished 5, but you also just add the 5 as well.
Okay.
Close harmony, second inversion. Or, and what I think this is trying to be is the 5 shittiest notes you can find on a fretboard. The sonic equivalent of like what a cat looks like when it's throwing up. You know that?
Yeah, I think so.
Or like a ready-made dinner, like a fettuccine Alfredo that's got like thrown behind the dishwasher, or thrown behind the laundry machine, and it's just been left there for 3 weeks, and now it's just like scrawling out of the packaging, out of the cellophane. This chord, I feel, is not a chord. It is meant to just, the same way that the album art, it's meant to just be aggressive, be in your face, be very abrasive.
Yes. And they hang on that first chord for so long.
and it's not like they hang on that chord, and then the other guitarist plays the same chord in like a different part of the in a different part of the, like I don't even know what this would look like or feel like to play on a guitar, but I just imagine like you got your entire hand just sprawled out over it.
Yeah, you basically just mangle your hands in a weird shape, I'm pretty sure, and just go for it. I'd be curious to know whether or not they even know what that chord is called. I imagine they just found it by trying to make something intentionally abrasive, and then they're like, that's the one.
Deerhunter minor major 7.
Yeah, exactly.
Add 5, add 2, add 3, add a sharp 5th.
Right.
Yeah. Second version, close harmony. The point is, it doesn't matter. Like, even when the bass starts to lay the groundwork, they come back in with that same chord.
Yes.
So, like, technically, the song is in G minor, but really it's not.
Right.
It does seem very atonal.
Yes.
So, like, you have the two guitars. They seem to be just, like, a little bit out of tune from each other. Mm-hmm. They have, like, a little bit of a profile that makes them out of tune, and they're playing the same chord, which, like, sounds even worse when they're just playing it together. And then, like, they'll start actually, like, strumming, like, G minor chords and that kind of thing when the bass and drums start going. But, like, and that goes on for a while. So, like, it makes me think of the album cover. It's meant to turn the people that you don't necessarily want listening to this album to stop listening to this album, sort of thing.
Totally.
Like
yes.
You want people who are going to be mad at this to be mad and be really mad.
Yes.
Sort of thing. It's a mess.
Yes.
And it's cool.
Yeah, it's incredibly messy. And to me, right away, what it tells me is I'm very confident this whole album was recorded live off the floor. I don't know if it was all like right back to back, like they just left the tape running and they played all these songs back to back. But for sure, they're all just playing together in a room. Like the way that it kind of chaotically starts up, the way that you can hear there's like someone on the talkback. Very early on saying like, hey, you guys can go. I can't make out exactly what they're saying, but it sounds something like, you guys are good. You can start now. As they're just hanging on that chord.
After the microphone makeout session?
I think that's after. I think they're literally making noise. I think they're just like, hanging, like we said, on that one chord. And Bradford's becoming intimate with the microphone. And then he's just like, you know, you guys could start, right? They're like, yeah, this is part of it. I think that rules. The other thing I think is I know for a fact this was recorded quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely shows in the drums. And I am very particular about drum recordings. Mm-hmm. And to me, especially this first track, I think it gets better. But this first track, the drums have a ton of room sound in them.
Yeah. And like really splashy.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of presence to the cymbals and to like you hear like basically what the review said. Like you hear those, it almost seems like the bass and the drums are leading it for sure.
They are, yeah.
And they cover up a lot of the vocals, which do start to come in. The vocals and the guitars that are all just like for the entire song. There's a rhythm guitar that's playing off of the bass, but then there's a lead guitar that's just playing those 5 notes that I've said over and over again in random orders, and I believe that's Bradford.
I have no video evidence to prove it, but I'm almost 100% sure that's Bradford.
Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of like atonal stuff that Bradford is doing that sort of gets, I wouldn't say hidden, but it sort of comes underneath the drums and the bass. And there's, I want to say a word. There's an avant-garde energy to basically the vocals and what Bradford is doing. Like what Bradford is doing is essentially just trying to push a boundary. Because the rhythm guitar, bass, and the drums, they sort of set up a structure, and then Bradford is sort of just trying to break that structure in different ways. So the vocals, they're not in tune with the rest of the song, and B, they're not in tune with each other, because it seems like there is a little bit more than just like one track or more tracks, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But like, yeah, the idea is that like it doesn't really matter what the tune is or like what the tone is. It's just to get a certain amount of people like saying that this is bad, so that they can go back and say, no, actually these are all in tune because fuck you, that's why.
Right,
sort of
exactly.
It's just like, this is what we chose, and it is a choice. Like, I would say without a doubt that Bradford didn't necessarily choose those 5 notes, but he sounded notes that would intentionally sound dissonant and off.
Yeah.
And so like, because everyone else right now is doing a thing, is doing a jam, and Bradford is sort of just like pushing boundaries and just like going outside of that jam.
Yeah, for sure. What he's doing is messy and noisy, but it's done with purpose.
Mm-hmm. Would you know what they are saying?
So I did look up the lyrics, which as we go into this, we'll find the lyrics are very spotty because they're very hard to make out. And in some cases, I think the lyrics that are posted online are incorrect. And in some places, they are incomplete. So I'm going to give the best kind of take that I can. I'll be honest with this first one. I have more to say on later ones. This one, I have no idea what's going on in this song. I don't know what N animals are. I originally was like, North animals? New animals? I don't particularly know. And the main kind of, I think a lot of these songs have like a main refrain or like chanted mantra chorus kind of thing. And that becomes like the thesis of each individual song.
I heard A, B, C, D, we've got no history.
Correct. That's the main one. It's A, B, C, D, we've got no history. And then later it's A, B, C, D, we've got no chemistry. And I don't really know what that means. Early on, he talks about, I was born of concrete, born out of chemistry. It comes out of chaos, blooms in infinity. New animals born of concrete, born out of chemistry. New animals, concrete, born into circuitry.
Okay.
So that's like his intro being like, hey, here's what's going on in this song.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's supposed to mean, I guess, other than like, hey, we're like the new animals. And this is our weird sound.
So this really makes me think of the album art.
Yep.
Really makes me think of the album art. So like, and like, we are the new animals. This is an introduction to the band, or this is an introduction to like everything. So like, this is the original sort of like pitch to the listener.
Right.
And and very interesting pitch indeed.
Right. It's very Devo-esque, where you start off with like, we are not men, we are Devo. You're like, we are not, men, we are Deerhunter.
Deer men.
Yes, exactly. Deer men, new animals.
Yeah, new animals.
Yeah.
As far as like what the job of this song is, I think it's plainly clear. It's just meant to feed off the album art, feed off the title, sort of like piss off like a certain amount of people and like really excite a certain other amount of people who want to piss those people off.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
This is aggressive and loud and sort of like has that sort of like top-down approach where you look at something and you're like, oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, well, that's weird. Oh my God, is that a dick? That's a dick, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think that's probably like a good summary of what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
You want to get into Adorno?
Let's fire it up.
Trent and Dave, listen to the song.
Okay. So, we just listened to Adorno.
Correct. I kind of like this one, I'm going to be honest.
This makes, like, this even puts it harder into my mind that the first song was a hazing ritual, sort of thing. It makes me feel like, okay, now, like, we've gotten, like, the boring people out of the room.
Yeah.
Now we can actually, like, start to, like, get into sort of, like, what this band is, what it's about. Like, it's a huge contrast, but also it's not, because it's in the same key, it's in the same chord.
Interesting.
And so, like, it makes me think, like, yeah, that last song was the first song, but this song is actually the first song.
I agree.
Sort of just like, that was sort of like a first impressions to like basically just get the boring people out of the room.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it.
And like it's immediately more organized. The bass comes in, like they actually like start to build. They do a build where like they start with a foundation, and they build off it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can we just take a second? You know, there's gonna be large parts of this podcast where I just fanboy about Josh's bass playing, but like that, like just dark, sleazy disco groove going on between him and Moses is so good, and like that is the song for me. I'm just grooving along to that the entire time, and yeah, I love that. Like that's kind of like a dance punk influence kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where you've got that like fun, upbeat, like danceability, but at the same time, you're like, we're going to make it noisy and grimy. And then it's kind of got that like edge and danger to it. And it's kind of fun. I really like it.
Yeah. And like that is the groove that gets put down for like most of the songs. So like the groove actually stays pretty static. It doesn't necessarily change. The most dynamic range, like the most dynamic movement that happens is with the vocals.
Yes.
So I think this might be a good time to just like dive into what's going on with these vocals a little bit.
Okay.
Just because like I've listened to it a few times and I've noticed that there has to be at least 2 tracks.
Yes, there's very clearly 2 tracks where I think Bradford has gone in and just double tracked his voice, but it's very loosely double tracked, which is interesting.
And I don't even know like what or how they were double tracked, whether or not like there's one that was recorded first and one that was recorded afterwards with that reference. Because if they're using that as a reference, man, it's so hard to be that out of tune. Like it's so hard to be like that dissonant and atonal with yourself if you're hearing a reference. It makes me think like he might have just like recorded one take, recorded another take, and then put them together.
Could be that. That's a good theory. I will say that is definitely done intentionally. One of the bands that Bradford states as an influence for this album is a band called The Fall. Okay. And that kind of vocal style is all over their work. It is 2 separate double-tracked vocals that are a little bit out of sync with each other all the time. So I think that was done very much on purpose.
I don't think it could be overdubbed. Like, that's the only thing. And because that was going on, I decided to do a little experiment.
Okay.
I decided to and you can do this if you have an audio interface, so you can just listen to the left and right separately.
Oh, interesting.
So there are 2 tracks and there are 2 vocal tracks, and they are completely panned, 100% panned.
Yeah. Hard left, hard right. Yeah.
Hard left, hard right. There's the right track has the primary, or what I would call the primary vocals. They seem to be more present. They seem to be a little bit louder, and that's where you get a lot of the main lyrics, main vocals, that kind of thing. Like the other track will also back it up. Sometimes there's a call and response. Yeah. So like, I think it's like tails crossed. So like one of them will say one thing. Sometimes the other one will say the other thing. Sometimes they'll line up. It's just like whatever they feel like, sort of thing. Which is another reason why I don't think that they were recorded like they're overdubs. They're not referencing each other. They're just like doing whatever they want. But like sometimes it just lines up that it's a call and response, which is crazy. Yeah. It just so like it just lines up in like a really interesting way. Spontaneously, because it feels to me like these aren't referencing each other. So so let's go back to the left track. The left track has the secondary vocals. It has the bass, lead guitar, drums. I think are very centered. Yeah. So the vocals on the left track have a lot of effects on them. So like there's parts where like the left track will have like, I don't know, like a super heavy delay and echo just put onto it. Yeah. And then the right track will be a lot more present. And that's really cool because like when the lyrics come in and he says, it feels like I'm living in 2 places at once. Yeah. So that's some multi-level narratives right there. Yes. That's some cool shit.
I've heard that called text painting before, where the text of the lyrics is being reflected in the music.
It is an interesting idea. Like the main hook of the lyrics are, am I sleeping on the floor or am I nailed to the cross? And when you have 2 different vocal tracks with 2 different tonal qualities saying that in like completely spontaneous ways to each other. Yeah. that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
That's a really cool idea. That sort of like amplifies a good idea and makes it even better.
Okay. Can I give you some of my theories on that tie into that? Because
Sure.
I did some research because I was like, what does Adorno mean? And so I literally just popped the word Adorno into Google, and I think I cracked the case on what this song is about.
All right.
So there is a man named Theodore W. Adorno who lived from 1903 to 1969. He was a German philosopher, sociologist, psychologist, musicologist, and composer known for his critical theory of society, which is where then I'm starting to pick up where this is going. Most notably, he was critical of jazz and popular music, viewing it as part of the culture industry that contributes to the sustainability of capitalism by making it aesthetically pleasing and agreeable.
Oh man, jazz was popular once.
Yeah, I know. Can you imagine? Can you imagine looking at jazz and be like, oh man, this popular music these kids
pop
are into?
music.
I know. And so to me, I think this totally plays into what Bradford's repeating, where he's saying, like you said, the am I sleeping on the floor or am I nailed to the cross bit? I think he's talking about, do you become like a principled, like starving artist, or do you like burden yourself with like the limitations of becoming, aesthetically pleasing and agreeable?
Oh, come on, Bradford. Why not both? Why
I know.
not both?
I mean, yeah, we'll get there for sure. But I feel like that's what's going on, and I think you outlined this really well. I think that's what's going on with the vocals too. Is there's one that's pleasant and agreeable, and there's one that's kind of out there and wild and has effects on it and stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly what's happening.
And it's a really cool idea. I like it. I like this song a lot.
Yeah.
And I think like it would be like so much better if like this was the track that had those kind of ideas on it. Mm-hmm. But that sort of vocal style goes throughout the entire album.
Yes.
It goes throughout every single song. And so I think this is a good time for us to jump into Tech School.
Tech School, let's go.
Trent and Dave, listen to the song.
All right.
Tech School, what do we think?
Drop out.
I think that was the main message of the song. I might have missed that. Yeah.
I don't want to go to Tech School. I'm so sick of Tech School.
Yeah. Can I just start by saying that is the best Devo guitar ripoff riff I've ever heard. I hear that every time, and I'm like, that is the Devo just like janky, kind of like dorky funk kind of thing. And I love it. I think it's great.
It's a really good groove. And like once again, it's sort of just like a groove that they set up in the background while Bradford just goes off on vocals. It's building even like farther into that space where like sort of like that weird call and response that's going on, like that spontaneous call and response, because you hear it in the vocals being done a lot, where like he'll say like Tech School, I'm so sick of Tech School, so sick of Tech School. It goes back and forth. It's really like spontaneous the way that it's done.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think I wanna talk a little bit more about avant-garde music.
Okay, hit
because there is a section where like everyone kind of like gets in on the experimentation.
Yes.
Around the middle of the song, where the vocals are sort of like layering that section of like Tech School Dropout, and the entire band just like goes into blitzkrieg bop chord changes.
Yes, I have notes on that. Yeah.
And like a completely new beat, a completely new drum beat, like key change, like everything sort of just like breaks. So like you have this cool setup, this cool like Devo setup, and then sort of like you break into a new song for like, I don't know, 8-12 bars. Yeah. And that is the ideas behind like pushing boundaries or just like moving out of a conventional space. The way that avant-garde works is it's not just like playing whatever you feel like. It's free experimentation. It's searching for ideas. So the idea like that a lot of musicians might do, where they sit down at the piano and they just noodle, and they just like play stuff, and they try to find interesting ideas. That kind of thing. With avant-garde music, it's much more of a collective search for new ideas, where they're experimenting as they play. It's not structured. They're not going to it with everything solved.
Right.
Like,
okay.
Not everything's lined up or sort of nailed down as like, we got to play this note here, we got to play this note here. No, Bradford is doing whatever he wants on vocals. Yes. So why don't we do whatever we want in the rhythm section? Let's play Blitzkrieg Bop for 8 bars. Why not?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
How does that work? How does that add to the song? And then Bradford just starts screaming on the microphone in 2 tracks with layered echoes, and it's like, this is actual avant-garde rock. Like, this is avant-garde music.
I would agree with that. And I think, to me, those bursts of, like you said, the Blitzkrieg Bop progression, to me, I think that's like a giant F you again, to be like, we could do this. We could go, like, to me,
like, you could do that, like, dear listener, you could play whatever you want, wherever you want, as long as you're like trying to make something good, or like not even, like, who cares?
I was going to say, to me, I think it's more like we could just, sound like an intentionally really basic, like, fundamental version of classic rock. Like, to me, that, like, especially the piano that comes in, that's just doing 8 notes, sounds like Little Richard or something out of like a 50s rock song kind of thing. And I think they're kind of intentionally taking that trope and being like, man, we're sick of tech school, we're sick of doing things like the standard traditional way, and we want to be more free from that, but also, like, we're just going to stick it in there and just yell over top of like a very traditional thing, just to be like, we're so past this that we could just co-opt it in the middle of our song and then abandon it. Like, I think that's kind of cool.
Maybe a lot of energy for avant-garde jazz comes from the same place.
Yes.
Where it's not necessarily a bad thing to play the standards, but maybe you get sick of them.
Right.
And maybe you want to push out just a little bit.
Yes.
So, like, I saw Ornette Coleman live at Massey Hall.
Okay.
And there was Ornette Coleman is a alto sax player, very good avant-garde musician, and there was a song where they played Bach's Prelude in C, I think.
You may be out of my depth.
But yeah, the double bass player starts playing on it. It's a very good riff. The drum player plays on that as well, and they sort of break into that for about a good portion of the song, and then Ornette starts playing riffs way outside of key, way outside of tune, that kind of thing, just like trying to push boundaries. They're trying to experiment on a structure that is like this very famous set of chord changes.
Right. Okay.
So that I think is like a lot of what's going on here as well. Like, they have this a very famous structure that they just switch to on a T. And it's like, I recognize that, and then Bradford's just screaming down, screaming at you while it's going on, and it's very neat, because like, it's not necessarily meant to sound good or bad. It's meant to make the audience participate.
That makes sense.
That is what a lot of avant-garde is supposed to be doing, like, in the sense of like where you're listening to music and you're just letting the music sort of like wash over you. You have to kind of be a little bit more engaged in this kind of music. Yeah. And you have to figure out, do you like this? Do you not like this? Sort of thing.
Right. That's cool. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. You want to talk about pawns?
Let's go over to pawns.
Trent and Dave, listen to the song.
All right.
So what are we thinking about pawns?
I kind of like it.
Interesting. Okay, what do you like about it?
Well, I like that, like, there's a defined form. Like, this is the first song that has like a true like A section and B section, which is sick. At the beginning, like, there's very dissonant guitar strumming, and it's very like, it holds so much tension in the first section.
Yep.
So like, it's entirely unresolved. It cycles between like the song's in E minor, so it wants to resolve to E minor, but it never does in this entire root section. It just cycles through, like, the bass cycles through different roots, and it stays completely unresolved. The like, the bass sort of like walks up from C, and then it walks chromatically to D for a bit.
Yeah.
But it all the while, like, always wants to resolve to E minor, and it never does for like 16 bars or like even longer than that. But like there's like a whole stretch of time where it's just like holding in as much tension as possible.
Yes.
And it always wants to resolve, and then it finally does. There's finally a song that has like real like tension and resolution. And,
right.
I do like resolving tension. That's what I like in music. I like when songs like do a job to build up like a lot of tension and then like hit that punchline, hit that payoff sort of thing. So like this is a song that actually like has good forms. It has a defined like A section, B section, C section, and they all lead up to each other sort of thing. So this one is very much carried by the bass.
Yes.
So I think
it is a bass-driven song.
So I think this might be a good time to talk about the bassist.
Yes.
And like what's going on here, because I was wondering if you had any thoughts about what John is doing on bass.
His name is Josh.
My
and
bad.
from this point forward, all bassists will be called Josh, because they only from this point forward in the band's history, they only have bassists named Josh.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of funny. So yeah, I think I'll be honest. This one is probably one of my least favorite songs on the album. Ooh. So it's really hard for me to try and dig into what's going on here, because I feel the stuttering kind of pattern like in the groove there between the bass and the drums, to me, like that kind of like lurching really like makes me feel uncomfortable, and I don't like it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does. That's what I like about this song. I like that there's a mood. I like that there's payoff. I like that there's like a narrative dynamic to like what's going on. It's like, things are tense, things are rough like this. There's and the bass is really good at playing off that, because like it starts with like that lurching, the dissonant guitars just strumming as much notes as they possibly can, and then sort of like that lurching drum beat, and then it resolves. It like actually resolves into like a kind of like pretty cool groove for a bit. And like this is the first song to actually do a really good conflict resolution.
Fair. I feel bad because you set me up so nicely to talk about my boy Josh, and this is the song I probably have the least amount to say on. We can because I can explain why. I fixate on. I have no idea what this song is about. From what I can tell in the chorus,
what are the lyrics saying?
So from what I can tell and what I can research online, Bradford is repeating pawns like hands grow over and over again. And I don't really know what that means in relation, especially on its own. I don't really know what that means. And then when I relate it back to what's happening in the verses, it makes even less sense to me. When I reference the chorus lyrics to the verse lyrics, each of them make less sense to me after I combine the two.
And I think that is good, because I do think that there is, and I'll get to sort of like the broader mood of this album when we talk about the full album. But this is a horror song.
Yes, and I have one theory that I can kind of stitch together that I think is what's going on here.
Like this is meant to be unsettling. This is meant to be like horrific. It's not, like you said before, like it's not a pleasant thing. It's definitely trying to create dissonance, trying to create conflict, trying to create tension, that sort of thing.
To the best of my interpretation, I think what's going on here is Bradford is kind of looking at some of the people that surround him that he just feels are uninteresting and kind of vapid and kind of surface level in their the way they go about living their lives. And I think he likens them to a pond that's just like still water that's sitting there festering and not growing, like not going anywhere or anything. And so that he's like, these ponds are just like slowly expanding.
Cool.
Like hands. I think that's what he's going for, where he's just like, these like zombie people around me are everywhere. I think is what he's trying to say.
It's just like a really cheesy low budget horror film with a bunch of like fake spiders and like they're and like it's all in black and white and that kind of thing. Like it's meant to like crawl down your spine sort of thing.
Right. The creature from the Black Lagoon, or the creature from tech school in this case.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on then.
Yeah, let's hit it.
Trent and Dave listen to the song.
Yeah, so that was language/violence.
Yes. How do we feel about that?
It's a different horror movie.
Yes.
If Pons was Alfred Hitchcock, then this is definitely Texas Chainsaw
Saw.
Massacre.
Yeah. Yeah. Just graphic.
Yeah, so this is like what I'm referring to as the noise factory. There's a bunch of songs that on this album that sort of fit that mold, and this is definitely just the epitome of being loud, being aggressive throughout the entire song.
Yes, I agree. I feel like it's all tension. There's no release at all. It's just meant to kind of make your skin crawl a little bit.
Yeah, and that can definitely be exhausting.
Yeah.
So let's go back to like my first impressions. Like I've been listening to 5 songs now, and almost all of them have been very similar.
Yes.
And like it's very chaotic, very loud, just playgrounds for the vocalist to like for Bradford just to like put all his effects into. This is definitely a song where like all of that is in play all at once. There's a lot of fast guitars, fast basses, like fast drums. Like there's a lot of energy going into the song, and there are no dynamics.
Right.
When I talk about that, and I'll get into it in the next album or in the next song, because like with dynamics, there's a lot of things that you would want to change, sort of thing. Like good dynamics is something that moves from like low to high. Like if you always are loud, if you always are aggressive, if you're always playing lots of notes, if you're always putting vocal layers into everything throughout the entire 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the song, that's actually got very little dynamics, very little moving energy, and it can be boring.
Right. Yeah, dynamics is change, and there's not a lot of change happening.
So this song is a song that I'm not too fond of.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To me, the only like notable part that I think is interesting is during those like, I think they're kind of like chorusy bits, Bradford is actually holding notes for the first time. He is like singing notes, and I mean, they're washed in either delay or reverb. It's kind of hard to tell which.
But they're still atonal.
Yeah, that's true.
It's still like in conflict with the bass. It's still in conflict with the root. So it's like, yeah, he is actually singing like actual notes and like holding them, and like there's a melody in the vocals, but the melody has actually like absolutely no reference to the bass or the guitars. Right. So like it is still very similar to all of the 5 or like all of the other songs that came before it. So So yeah, when I got to this, I was definitely tired, and I actually had to take a break when I listened to this song the first time, because it's just like, oh, okay, there's another one, sort of thing. There's another one, and yeah, like I'm once again reminded of the album art.
Right.
Sort of thing. Like this reminds me a lot of the first song.
Yeah. I wrote down, this feels like a sequel to And Animals.
Nice.
It's that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say on this song is I tried to look up lyrics to it to be like, okay, but there must be something that's going on here that like can give me some more context as to what this is supposed to be about, or like what's informing the music behind it. And everywhere I look says this song is an instrumental. And that is absolutely false, because you can hear her vocals. But at the same time, it's almost like the world is telling me like this is just really like obscured vocals, and like don't even worry about trying to figure it out. It's like you're digging too deep into something that's just kind of noise for the sake of noise in this particular case. And so I don't think it's worth trying to dissect that. But I thought it was funny that even me, like, you know, trying to claw for some kind of meaning behind it, the world is telling me no, just stop, don't worry about it.
No, this is a slasher movie. This is just like straight up just like let's do as much damage as we can,
Yeah.
But I think that sort of like it doesn't achieve its goal because like there can be good slasher movies. Like not everything just has to be violence and chaos all the time. Like you need low periods. You need something to balance it out.
Right. This is just like 3 minutes of exploding heads. And after a while, you're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Which is a good contrast for our next song, which we will pick up in part 2 of our album cover for Deerhunter's Turn It Up.
See you then.